Excellent. So let's move into learning outcomes and efficiency factors just to kind of look at that really quickly and to kind of talk through some of it. So one of the big things as we look at this area is there's a couple of things. One, based on the levels, there's one thing that we're going to look at immediately, and before we even score an application, we're going to sit down and look at, and that is the level attained year. That year cannot go beyond the December 31st date. So for this year, if any of these years were a 2020, it automatically is disqualified and the student will get one score and be done. So make sure, I mean, something simple like checking that level and checking that year is going to be really important. And it's easy for a student to make the mistake and put the wrong year there, even though they know that it was supposed to be done in 2019, for example. It's very easy for them to put that 2020 year because that's just what's fresh on their mind. That's what they're used to typing or used to writing at the time. If that's there, it's done. It will not move forward. It will, I mean, it's over for that student. The second thing is that there should be, and there should be continual growth in it. So when we look at that, we want to see something that's measurable. So for example, I want to use this, and just to give you an idea, this idea of parasite prevention and treatment to reduce loss or death, 16% to 3.7%. Is it easy for us to measure that? And to measure for us, as we look at this and we see what 16% to 3.7% means, is that easy for us to measure as we're scoring the application? Samantha, what do you think?
Yeah, that definitely is measurable. And okay. Then in the description, it tells you how they got there.
Exactly. So I'm going to tell you that if it's a percentage, if I'm looking at the percentage right here and there's very little detail in the description piece, it becomes really hard for me to be able to say that that's measurable. Let me explain why. Because I don't know what 16% and 3.7% is based off of. So what we want to include here then is something to help us understand how that's been calculated. So how did we get to the point that that calculation occurred? The other thing is, and I will say this is much more measurable than novice versus advanced. I'll be honest, there is nothing you can write over here to get me from novice to advanced to help me to understand that. And I'll be honest, the people that I've talked to and the people that I've seen scoring these applications, they're going to feel very similarly. And most of them are not going to give you a lot of points and give that student a lot of points because it's not something that we can necessarily measure right offhand. So you want to use something that we can measure. I'll be honest, I think percentages work, and I think they work really well. Honestly, it's probably one of the ways that I think is really one of the best ways we can do it based on some of the things we're looking at, unless we get into actual calculations where we can look at average daily feed costs and things like that. But percentages work really well as long as there's some explanation on that description side. This where we're talking about novice versus certified. Certified I can understand. Novice I don't get. What does novice mean? How do we define novice? What Ms. Begno says as novice is going to be different than what Ms. Bell says. And so that's not measurable to a specific amount. And so we want to make sure that there's some specificity to that. The one thing that I would add that we want to look here is that we're looking at death. And so due to parasite prevention and treatment, like how can we reduce death? So we may want to say in our barns, we have on average 30,000 hens or 30,000 chickens. If that's the case, then we can say, okay, a 16% loss due to that is going to be we can calculate what that is. 3.7%, we can calculate what that changes. That's pretty significant. If I have a flock that's then only 50, that change isn't so big. We're not seeing that change is readily available. So we want to make sure that that's clarified and that it's just there and there's detail to it as well. I will say, though, that the other piece to this is then that description. The description has to have details. There's a lot of times that I can get here and I see, and we see a lot of descriptions that are basically a sentence long that doesn't really provide us a lot of ideas as to why it was calculated, how it was calculated. I mean, anything about it. All it says is basically, this is what we looked at. We need to know more specificity as to why. In some cases, how did you get to that point? So, for example, on number 1, I think this works really well. It's telling us that by switching from a 16% protein feed to an 18 to 20%, that they were able to cut their head expenses down by 28%. That's huge. Okay, that's easy for us to be able to calculate to see how that impacted and how that was changed and how that grew. We don't see that all the time in those applications. And so make sure that as you're working with your student, it's not just about having a measurable piece in the beginning and level attained. It's also about making sure that that description is really detailed so that we can see exactly how that description was calculated or how that value was calculated. And then that can be actually articulated to someone else. Does that make sense? The other thing is that as you're looking, and the last thing, and then we're gonna do a couple of questions because I think we're about 3 minutes from our break time, is then thinking about what those efficiency factors and learning outcomes are. There are lots of places that you can look up and you can search online like efficiency factors for this type of project. There's a lot of things that we can look at to try to calculate what some of those are. I have seen, though, that sometimes we use some of those learning outcomes, and the way that this is a flock testing for disease. There's a lot of things that we could do is the way we calculate that rather than using these level attained. But based on the way that it's worded here in that efficiency factor and that learning outcome, then helps to dictate what we think we could use as a level, or how we can measure that, or how we can articulate that in the application. So you want to make sure that however you word that learning outcome or efficiency factor, it's worded in a way that we can actually see a calculated, measurable level or value that we're going to be able to use. And a lot of times I will say a numerical value is going to carry a lot more weight than a qualitative value or a word value. So definitely think about how you're going to write those as well. Questions or comments, Mr. Benson or Mr. Ray?
Well, I think you need to keep in mind the definition of an efficiency. Okay,
Yeah.
Something, you know, I guess. Well, if you can make more money. If you're making more money, you're probably being more efficient. If you're cutting down on mortality rates, you're probably being more efficient. If you're getting more twins in lambing season, you're more efficient. If you can trim down your shearing time from 10 minutes a ewe to 4 minutes a ewe, you're more efficient. And those are all using numbers to describe the efficiency that makes it very clear to understand. The other thing here is that you have 5 boxes to fill in, right? 5 lines. And yes, 3 or 4 well-written ones might be better than 5 that give you things like bad to good, novice to advanced, you know, but 5 well-written ones are better than 5 not so well-written ones, right? So use all the lines and work to create 5 well-written efficiencies that are measurable. And numbers work best.
Yeah, and I can say in all the applications that I've seen at the end of the time that they came through and they were then in it as a national finalist, I can only remember one application that got to a national finalist that did not have 5. I'm just to be honest with you. So you need to spend time working with your students, and a lot of times I'll be honest, I think I see that this is maybe one of the pages that's done the quickest and just kind of brushed over because I mean, we throw some numbers in there, we write a little description, it should be good. And this is where I think if we're missing that measurable piece, we're not being able to see how that applies, or it's not well written. It does have a bigger implication than a lot of people think.
And I think at a high level, this is a make or break page.
Mm-hmm. It is.
And so when you're writing these, especially for state or nationals, and you're stuck, go to your resources, call Dr. Rubenstein, call us in the office and say, hey, We need another, I think, strong efficiency. Can you just give us some ideas, and let's throw some ideas around, because you have a great opportunity to do that. You have the resources, and hopefully we can provide you with a strong answer or an efficiency that you could include in and work it in this student's project.
Yeah, and Mr. Vincent, I would add, I think, I mean, I would say there's 4 major areas to the application that are going to be make or break. And that is the description of the projects, the budget pages, your efficiency factors, and then the skills, knowledges, and competencies. Those 4, I mean, they can make or break an application. I hate to say it, but your resume, and I mean, while it's important and you need to have it there, and pictures are important and they need to be well written, and you need to have, I mean, really good answers to the questions at the beginning of the application, your accomplishments and impacts and all of those things, they're important. Those 4 pages and those 4 sections, I think, are kind of make or break areas. We need to be able to see that there's growth. We need to be able to see that there's time put in, and that we've seen that there's learning that's coming from
understanding. Yeah, understanding.
Yep. And
I'll tell you, a resume page rarely makes or break the situation.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, they have to be there, and they have to be well done. But I mean, really focus on those 4 areas as, I mean, really hard looks, is to try to understand what you've got written in those parts of the application. So I think we're past our time.
If you can't explain it, I definitely will reiterate, if you can't explain the percentage, how it was got there, especially a lot of people want to do like knowledge. Mm-hmm. My knowledge has grown from 25% to 75%. Well, what does that really mean? Now, if you're taking a tree ID test, and the first time you took the tree ID test and you got 2 out of 10 right, so you had 20% knowledge, versus, you know, the last time you took it and you got 9 out of 10 trees correct and you got a 90%, then at least you were able to explain it. But, you know, make sure the kids have explained those efficiencies in that description. But even then, I would be very wary of using percentages. I just say 9 plants correctly identified out of 10, or something like that. Be a little bit more descriptive, because it's getting to the point where people see those percentages now and they're like, oh, here we go again. It's more percentages that they're just throwing in there. So you got to be careful, because the judges just get tired of seeing that. I mean, I hate to say it, might almost write you off, you know, if they've read enough of those.
And to be honest, I think one of the ones that I've seen in a perfect example of that exact idea, Mr. Ray, is like somebody that's scouting fields for weeds.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of times that I'll see it come through, and there'll be something about weed identification, novice to advanced. I don't know what that means. Like, what does that really pertain to? Then I've got others that'll come through and they can identify 10% of the weeds. Then they can identify 90% of the weeds. What does that mean? Are you only identifying 90% of 3 species of weeds? Are you able to identify 90% of all of the weeds that you might possibly see? I don't know. So the best way to write that then is you can identify 6 weed varieties. Then you're able to identify 19 weed varieties. That measurement piece, that is much easier for us to digest and understand where that growth was in that efficiency factor. How did you become more efficient? I mean, or another way to look at it is how much time you're spending in that field. So you've spent you may have to walk through at the beginning, and it may take you an hour and 15 minutes to do a field, to do an acre. Whereas as you get a little bit more experienced and you're building that efficiency, it may break it down to 45 minutes. And you can walk an acre then, because that efficiency of being able to identify things quicker and know what it is, it's much easier for you to be able to see that. So those are the ways that we want to see that as hard, fast numbers. While percentages can work, if there's explanations in those descriptions, I agree, Mr. Ray. I think that because percentages got so overused without descriptions, that there's a lot of people that I see a percentage and it's hard to break away from them to get them to think about whether or not it's measurable. I think it can be, most definitely, but it's got to be really well described then in the description piece. So
one question going along with that, Ms. Williams asked, what's a good example of a good qualitative measurement, or is there one? Would it have been better to say non-certified and then certified on this example, maybe?
Probably, I would go with that, because you're not certified. You haven't actually done any training, or untrained, something along those lines. Non-certified, untrained might have worked, and then certified. But then over here on the description side is you need to be able to explain, how did you get to that certification level? So did you have to pass some sort of certification exam, and did you have to pass that exam with a certain percentage? So how do we know that you became certified? Who certified you? So I think that's what really gets tricky there.
And also, I think just being certified, what is it that you can do now that you're certified that you couldn't officially do before?
Yep.
That's what needs to be mentioned in the description. That's what makes you more efficient. You can do more skills, because just because you put not certified and certified, you know, it needs to be very specific in the description of what you're capable to accomplish now.
Yep. So I think in this one, a perfect example is, you look over here, they're saying that they were able to save over $75 per year in testing fees. That's where that should have came in. That's where they should have been calculating that, as how much money they saved, not whether or not they were novice or certified. Because again, we can see value, and we can see the numeric value as to how much that cost went down. So per animal, how much did it change in the cost? And did they save in that process? Did they become more efficient in it?
Yeah.